"I've never seen a car so fast." That was Lewis Hamilton's verdict on the Red Bull RB19 after the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and he wasn't only talking about its all-round performance. For Hamilton was also amazed at the speed differential when Max Verstappen overtook him at the end of lap 11, breezing past on the run to the first corner. Yes, Verstappen had the DRS open and Hamilton's was closed, but even so, it was a big difference of as much as 34 kilometres per hour, as much as twice what might traditionally be expected. That's led to questions about what clever trick Red Bull might be using to achieve this effect. In this video, we'll explain just how big the Red Bull DRS advantage is and how it is achieving it. First, we need to quantify just how big the advantage Red Bull had with the DRS open was. In the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, the Red Bull was the quickest car in the main speed trap. There, Verstappen had an advantage of 6 km per hour over second fastest Logan Sargent in the low drag, low downforce Williams. No wonder Hamilton was amazed at the ease with which Verstappen breezed past him, doubly so given the Mercedes had one of the smaller DRS effects in the field, so didn't have so big an advantage when passing rivals. However, much as the footage showing Verstappen blasting past Hamilton pointed to a huge speed delta, it's not a particularly useful comparison. Such drive-by passes are common in the DRS era, and it's inevitable that the fastest car in a straight line with the DRS open being compared to one of the slower cars on the straights with its DRS closed will exaggerate that effect. That's doubly the case given Verstappen's strategy was to use the DRS zone on the run to the last corner to close up on Hamilton but not make an overtaking attempt to set him up to make the pass on the main straight with the benefit of a tow. But if you look at the wider top speed data, so not just that in the speed trap, the gap wasn't so extreme. Haas driver Nico Hülkenberg was clocked just 1 km per hour slower than Verstappen's peak, suggesting that the Red Bull straight line speed wasn't quite as otherworldly as is supposed. So while it's clear Red Bull has a car that's very aero efficient, both with the DRS activated and without it, Hamilton's perspective when he was overtaken was understandably somewhat distorted. We'll get onto Red Bull's design in a moment, but first it's important to establish what the DRS is and isn't for. There were hopes that it might be possible to cast the DRS, which was introduced as a temporary band-aid solution, into history under the new regulations that came in for 2022. However, with dirty air still a problem, even with this less sensitive generation of ground effect cars, it's set to remain for some years yet. DRS was introduced in 2011 as a means to make overtaking easier. The idea was that it could be used by a car chasing another to offset the time lost in the corners in turbulent air and be able to attack. Originally, this was achieved by opening a 50mm gap between the main plane and the flap of the rear wing. Under the current regulations, this is increased to 85mm in order to ensure a powerful effect, given the rear wing itself generates less downforce than it did before 2022. While every car is allowed the same size of opening, not all DRS effects are equal. This is because the size of the drag reduction is influenced by the geometry of your rear wing. Different cars produce a different level of drag reduction. This means that just because Red Bull is gaining a bigger advantage than many of its rivals in terms of top speed when it opens the DRS, it doesn't mean it's doing anything untoward. Why is the Red Bull DRS so powerful? Well, our F1 technical expert Gary Anderson has taken a close look at it, and he believes that it's all about the wider design philosophy of the Red Bull RB19. First of all, Red Bull brought a well-tuned rear wing and beam wing package to Jeddah that produced efficient downforce and meant it was one of the stronger cars without the DRS deployed as well. Compared to what ran in Bahrain, the rear wing was less cambered and also featured tweaked end plates to match, while the beam wing was a single element one that produced less drag and downforce. Compare the detail of the rear wing flap where it curves into the end plates to the Mercedes. The Red Bull doesn't have any sharp corners that would generate draggy vortices from the trailing edge. Also, the slot gap detail on the small outer section of the flap that doesn't open works efficiently with the rear wing corner airflow, as does the chord length of the flap in that area. The Mercedes and the Ferrari also have a slot gap separator closing the end of that short section of slot gap when the DRS is open. This means that small section of wing will be producing more downforce and with it drag when the DRS is open. In general terms, simply opening the 85mm slot gap might give you something in the region of 15 to 18 km per hour of extra speed, maybe as much as 20 km per hour in an extreme case. But the aerodynamic map of an F1 car is a complex, interconnected system, so opening the DRS has an effect on the rest of the car. The beam wing relies on the airflow generated by the rear wing when the DRS is closed to keep the airflow attached. Open the DRS and the beam wing stalls as a result. That will, in turn, stall the rear of the underfloor. By stall it means reducing the potential to produce downforce that, if managed correctly, can also reduce drag. Not by a vast amount, but enough to give you a few kilometres per hour of extra speed. Now, let's take a look at the airflow from the diffuser and beam wing with the DRS closed. Here you can see the single element beam wing and also the large corner fillet radius of the diffuser. But open the DRS and this area works less effectively, meaning the airflow changes and reduces the downforce and therefore drag produced. You could call this a triple DRS effect, with drag reduction primarily in the rear wing, but also on the beam wing and floor. Ferrari had a small beam wing in Saudi Arabia compared to Red Bull and Mercedes. Mercedes has usually had a similar approach to Red Bull with its beam wing when in two-piece configuration, but because it generally has to run more rear wing, that means more downforce and still more drag when the DRS is open. That's why the Mercedes was the slowest with DRS open. Combined with a two-element beam wing, that means it's more difficult to get the whole rear end of the car working as one and therefore maximise the drag reduction effect. The Red Bull RB19 is the best car for a reason. To create a car that's so well integrated aerodynamically requires the depth of understanding Adrian Newey and his technical team at Milton Keynes have. Rivals would do well to look and learn from what is the best car in the field. After all, the DRS is now in its 13th season and the potential to maximise its effectiveness is well known. It's easy to focus on individual parts of an F1 car and think of them as modular, but it's all about how it all works together. When it comes to trying to optimise the DRS, you have to start with the underfloor, and then it's all about the fine detail and control, with the beam wing an important part of this jigsaw. Downforce is generated at the square of the speed, so whatever downforce and drag you have at, say, 165 km per hour, you have 4 times that downforce and drag at 330 km per hour. If you simply let that happen, you then have to be able to support that incredible aerodynamic load mechanically, leading you in the direction of having a very stiff car. By having a floor-edge sealing system that allows the overall downforce to still increase, but not at the square of the speed, it will allow you to run a softer suspension setup and reduce the potential of getting into porpoising or bouncing problems. Gary Anderson calls this the dimmer switch effect, meaning it is leaned off a little rather than switched on and off. Red Bull is good at managing this downforce increase, but it never leads to a sudden loss of downforce, it simply eases the rate at which it builds up. That's why it has a car that works well in all conditions and has never had big porpoising problems. It's this understanding that's at the heart of the extra reward Red Bull gets from its DRS. It's not because of some magic bullet or secret trick, it's just about having a car that's very well connected up aerodynamically thanks to having a level of aerodynamic and mechanical understanding that's unmatched by rival teams.